The phone call came at 3 a.m. while I was working the night shift at Seattle General Hospital. Mrs. Harrison, your daughter has been arrested for public disturbance and assault at the police department promotion ceremony. You need to come immediately. I was a trauma nurse used to emergencies, but nothing prepared me for this. My daughter Emma, who volunteered at the animal rescue every weekend and cried when she accidentally stepped on a spider, was in custody for attacking my husband at his big promotion to police captain. I drove through the empty Seattle streets in a daze. The promotion ceremony was supposed to be Marcus's crowning achievement. 20 years on the force, finally getting the recognition he deserved. Emma had seemed excited about it, even helped pick out my dress for the occasion. Now she was in jail and Marcus was probably at the hospital. When I arrived at the precinct, the desk sergeant's face was grim. She's in holding. Your husband is at Harborview getting stitched up. Ma'am, I've known Emma since she was little. This isn't like her at all. They led me to a small room where Emma sat across from Detective Riley Morrison, who I recognised from Marcus's work stories. Emma's knuckles were bruised and there was blood on her dress, Marcus's blood. But what struck me most was her expression. She wasn't crying or apologetic. She looked relieved. Mom, she said when she saw me, I need to tell you something about Marcus. Detective Morrison shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Harrison, your daughter made some serious allegations tonight. Before we proceed, you should know that Captain Harrison is pressing charges for assault. I sat down across from my daughter, studying her face. Emma, what happened? Why would you attack Marcus at his own promotion ceremony? Emma looked around the room, then directly at me. Her voice was steady and clear. Because he's been raping me for 2 years and tonight was supposed to be his reward. The room went silent except for the humming of fluorescent lights. Detective Morrison's pen stopped moving across his notepad. My world tilted sideways. That's a very serious accusation, Detective Morrison said carefully. Can you tell us more about what you mean? Emma pulled out her phone, hands steady despite everything. I've been documenting it. I know nobody would believe me against a police captain without proof. She swiped through her photos and my stomach lurched at what I glimpsed on the screen. I grabbed her hand. Emma, honey, why didn't you tell me? She looked at me with eyes that seemed decades older than 16. Mom, I tried. 3 months ago I told you I was uncomfortable with how Marcus touched me. You said he was just being affectionate because he never had a daughter. The memory hit me like a physical blow. I had said that. Emma had tried to talk to me about Marcus being too touchy, and I dismissed her concerns. I'd been so happy to finally have a partner who wanted to be involved with Emma after her father left when she was 8. I told Grandma Susan when she visited, Emma continued. She said, teenage girls sometimes get confused about appropriate affection from father figures. I told my school counsellor, Mrs. Patterson, but she said she'd need more evidence before she could do anything. Detective Morrison was writing furiously now. What about other family members? Friends? I told my best friend Jessica. She said I was lucky to have a stepdad who cared so much, unlike her absent father. I told Coach Williams when I quit the soccer team because I couldn't handle Marcus coming to games anymore. He said I shouldn't make assumptions about people's motives. Each name Emma mentioned felt like another punch to my chest. All the adults had failed her. I had failed her. So why tonight? Detective Morrison asked. What made you decide to act at the promotion ceremony? Emma's composure finally cracked slightly. Because last week I caught him in Lily's room. My blood froze. Lily was Marcus's 8-year-old niece who'd been staying with us while her parents dealt with a divorce. She was sleeping and he was touching her, the same way he touches me. Emma's voice broke. I realised he wasn't going to stop. The promotion would give him more power, more respect, more opportunities to hurt kids. I couldn't let that happen. Detective Morrison looked at me. Mrs. Harrison, where is Lily now? She went back to her mother yesterday, I whispered. The divorce was finalised. Emma nodded. That's why I acted tonight. It was my last chance to stop him before he found other victims. Detective Morrison excused himself to make some phone calls. I sat alone with my daughter, processing the magnitude of what she'd told me. My husband of 3 years, the man I trusted with my child, had been systematically abusing her. Emma, I'm so sorry. I should have listened. I should have protected you. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Mom, you couldn't have known. He's really good at manipulation. That's probably why he became a cop. The authority helps him get away with it. 20 minutes later, Detective Morrison returned with Detective Sarah Chen from the Special Victims Unit. Detective Chen sat down with a gentle but professional manner. Emma, I specialise in cases like this. I need to ask you some detailed questions, and I want you to know that none of this is your fault. You were incredibly brave tonight. For the next 2 hours, Emma walked Detective Chen through everything. She showed them photos, recordings, and a journal she'd been keeping. The evidence was extensive and heartbreaking. Marcus had been grooming her since the day he moved in, gradually escalating his abuse while systematically isolating her from potential help. Detective Chen explained that they'd need to get Emma a medical exam and interview other potential victims. Based on what you've shown me, this appears to be a pattern of predatory behaviour. There may be other victims we don't know about yet. They released Emma to me around 6 a.m. with a court date pending. As we walked to my car, she asked, "Mom, are you angry at me for ruining your marriage?" I stopped walking and pulled her into a fierce hug. "Emma, you saved us both, and possibly other children too. I'm proud of you for being so brave." But privately, I was terrified about what came next. Marcus had resources, connections, and a pristine reputation. Emma was a 16-year-old girl accusing a police captain of rape. The system wasn't exactly stacked in our favour. We drove home in silence as Seattle woke up around us. Our house felt different somehow, tainted by the knowledge of what had happened within its walls. Emma went straight to her room, and I sat in the kitchen, staring at family photos that now felt like lies. My phone started ringing around 8 a.m. Marcus's partner, Detective Kevin Walsh, was the first call. "Sarah, what the hell happened last night? Marcus is saying Emma has completely lost her mind." I hung up without responding. Then Marcus's mother called. "Sarah, that girl needs professional help. The stress of the promotion must have triggered some kind of psychotic break." I turned off my phone after the 5th call. Everyone was ready to believe Marcus and dismiss Emma. It was exactly what she'd predicted. Emma came downstairs around noon, pale but determined. "Mom, we need to get a lawyer, and I want to call Lily's mom to warn her." I'd been thinking the same thing. We found attorney Rebecca Martinez through the Victims Advocacy Center. She agreed to meet us that afternoon at her downtown Seattle office. Attorney Martinez listened to Emma's story without interruption, occasionally taking notes. When Emma finished, she leaned back in her chair. "This is going to be a difficult case. Police officers, especially at Marcus's level, have significant institutional protection. But your documentation is impressive, and the fact that you exposed him publicly shows you're not looking for money or attention." She explained that we'd be fighting 2 battles, the criminal case against Marcus and the assault charges against Emma. The good news is that given the circumstances, I doubt any prosecutor will pursue the assault charges seriously. The bad news is that Marcus will use every resource available to discredit Emma. That evening I called Lily's mother, Rebecca. The conversation was the hardest thing I'd ever done. "Rebecca, I need to tell you something about Marcus. Emma caught him, touching Lily while she was sleeping." The silence stretched for 30 seconds. When Rebecca finally spoke, her voice was shaky. "I wondered, Lily's been having nightmares since she stayed with you, and she started wetting the bed again." Rebecca brought Lily to the police station the next day for a forensic interview. The 8-year-old confirmed Emma's account in heartbreaking detail. She'd been too scared to tell anyone, thinking she'd get in trouble. Detective Chen called me that evening with an update. "We've arrested Marcus. He's being held without bail given the flight risk and the nature of the charges. We've also identified 2 other potential victims from his previous assignments, teenage daughters of families he worked with in domestic violence cases." I felt a mixture of relief and horror. Relief that Marcus was behind bars, horror at the scope of his crimes. Emma started seeing a trauma therapist, Dr. Patricia Hoffman, 3 times a week. The first few sessions were rough. Emma would come home drained and quiet. But gradually, she started talking about her feelings instead of just the facts. "Dr. Hoffman says what I did at the ceremony was a form of self-defense," Emma told me after a particularly good session. "I wasn't just protecting myself, I was protecting future victims." The legal process moved slowly. Attorney Martinez prepared us for a long fight. Marcus had hired Jackson & Associates, one of Seattle's most expensive criminal defense firms. They were already planting stories in the media about troubled teenagers making false accusations against heroic police officers. 3 weeks after the arrest, we got a call from Detective Chen. 2 more victims have come forward. Both are adults now, but they were teenagers when Marcus abused them during his time in community policing. Their stories are very consistent with Emma's experience. The criminal case was getting stronger, but our personal situation was getting worse. Someone had leaked our address and reporters started showing up at our door. Emma couldn't walk to school without cameras following her. My supervisor at the hospital called me in for a meeting. "Sarah, the publicity around this case is creating problems. Some of our police officer patients are requesting different nurses. We think it might be best if you took some time off." I was being punished for my daughter's courage. It felt like the entire system was designed to protect abusers and silence victims. Attorney Martinez filed a motion to suppress Marcus's legal team from releasing Emma's juvenile records or therapy information. "They're going to try to paint her as unstable. We need to control the narrative before they destroy her credibility." The hearing was scheduled for the following week. As we prepared, Emma's strength continued to amaze me. She spent hours with Attorney Martinez, rehearsing testimony and reviewing evidence. She never complained or asked why this was happening to her. "Mom," she said one evening while we were preparing dinner, "do you think other kids will see what I did and speak up about their abusers too?" I stopped chopping vegetables and looked at her. "I hope so, honey. What you did was incredibly brave. It might give other victims the courage they need." She smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in weeks. Then it was worth it. The preliminary hearing arrived on a grey Seattle morning. The courthouse was packed with media and supporters from both sides. Marcus's fellow officers filled several rows, their presence clearly intended to intimidate. But survivors' advocacy groups had shown up too, holding signs of support for Emma. Attorney Martinez had warned us that Marcus would be there, and seeing him would be difficult for Emma. When he walked into the courtroom in an expensive suit instead of his jail jumpsuit, Emma's hand tightened in mine. But she didn't look away. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Michael Torres, presented the evidence methodically. Emma's photos, recordings and journal entries, Lily's forensic interview, testimony from the other victims who'd come forward. The case against Marcus was overwhelming. Marcus's attorney, David Jackson, tried to attack Emma's credibility. He painted her as a troubled teenager with behavioral problems, citing her assault on Marcus as evidence of instability. But Attorney Martinez was ready. "Your Honor, my client documented years of systematic abuse before taking any action. Her response at the promotion ceremony was the desperate act of a child who'd exhausted all other options. Every adult she tried to tell had failed her." When Emma took the stand to testify about that night, the courtroom was completely silent. She spoke clearly and calmly, describing how she'd watched Marcus receive praise and promotion while knowing what he'd done to her and Lily. "I realized that if I didn't act, he would keep hurting children. His promotion would give him even more opportunities and protection. I couldn't live with that knowledge." David Jackson tried to rattle her during cross-examination. "Miss Harrison, isn't it true that you've always resented your stepfather? That you were angry about your mother remarrying?" Emma looked directly at him. "Mr. Jackson, I loved Marcus when he first married my mom. He was kind and funny, and I was happy to have a father figure. The resentment came after he started raping me." Her use of the word rape instead of the softer language everyone else had been using hit the courtroom like a thunderclap. Several jurors visibly reacted. Judge Patricia Williams ultimately ruled that there was sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. Marcus was denied bail and remanded to custody. Emma's assault charges were formally dropped. Outside the courthouse, Emma was surrounded by reporters shouting questions. Attorney Martinez guided us through the crowd, but Emma stopped and turned to face the cameras. "I want other kids who are being abused to know that it's not your fault and you're not alone. Adults are supposed to protect children, not hurt them. If the adults in your life won't listen, keep speaking up until someone does." The clip went viral within hours. My daughter had become the face of a movement she never asked to join. The trial was scheduled for 6 months later. In the meantime, we tried to rebuild our lives. Emma returned to school with increased security. She joined a support group for teenage survivors and started speaking at youth events about recognizing and reporting abuse. I went back to work part-time, and we moved to a smaller apartment across town for privacy. The house we'd shared with Marcus had too many bad memories anyway. Detective Chen kept us updated on the investigation. They'd identified 7 total victims spanning Marcus's 15-year career. The FBI had taken over the case given the pattern of abuse and potential civil rights violations. Emma's courage to speak up publicly broke this wide open, Detective Chen told us. These other victims might never have come forward without her example. Marcus's defense team tried every legal maneuver possible. They filed motions to suppress evidence, change venues and delay the trial. They hired private investigators to dig into Emma's past and mine. They even suggested that I had coached Emma to make false accusations for financial gain. But Emma had left them very little to work with. Her documentation was meticulous, her story was consistent, and she had no apparent motive to lie. The other victims' similar experiences made the pattern undeniable. 3 months before trial, David Jackson approached Attorney Martinez with a plea offer. Marcus would plead guilty to reduced charges in exchange for a sentence of 8 to 12 years. "Absolutely not," Emma said immediately when we told her. "He needs to be held fully accountable for what he did to all of us." Attorney Martinez agreed. "We have a strong case. Taking a plea now would send the message that police officers get special treatment even when they abuse children." 2 weeks later, Jackson came back with a better offer. Marcus would plead guilty to all charges and accept 25 years to life. In exchange, Emma and the other victims wouldn't have to testify at trial. I could see the temptation in Emma's eyes. The thought of not having to relive her trauma in front of a jury was appealing. But she surprised me again. "I want to testify. Other survivors need to see that it's possible to speak truth to power, even when that power seems untouchable." Meanwhile, the impact of Emma's case was spreading beyond Seattle. 3 other police departments launched internal investigations after victims saw Emma's story and came forward with their own experiences. A congressional subcommittee announced hearings on abuse of authority by law enforcement officers. Emma received hundreds of letters from other survivors thanking her for giving them courage to speak up. She read every single one, often crying as she learned about the scope of abuse that had been hidden for years. Dr. Hoffman helped Emma process these letters during therapy sessions. "It's overwhelming to realize how many people have been hurt," Emma told me after one particularly difficult session, "but it also makes me feel less alone." The media attention brought both support and harassment. Emma's story inspired documentaries and news specials about child abuse in law enforcement families. But it also attracted online trolls who called her a liar and threatened our family. Attorney Martinez hired a security firm to monitor our apartment building after someone posted our address online. Emma had to change schools when protesters showed up demanding her expulsion. The new school was more supportive, but Emma struggled to make new friends who didn't know about her case. 3 weeks before the trial, we received devastating news. One of the other victims, a 22-year-old woman named Ashley Porter, had attempted suicide. Detective Chen called to tell us she was hospitalized but stable. The pressure of the upcoming trial became too much for her, Detective Chen explained. She left a note saying she couldn't handle testifying against Marcus in front of everyone. Emma was devastated by the news. She blamed herself for pushing forward with the trial when other victims weren't ready. I found her crying in her room that night, clutching Ashley's letter of support. "Mom, what if I'm making things worse for everyone? What if I should have just kept quiet?" I sat on her bed and pulled her close. "Emma, you gave Ashley and the others a chance at justice. What they do with that chance is their choice, not your responsibility." Dr. Hoffman scheduled emergency sessions to help Emma work through her guilt. They discussed survivor responsibility and the difference between being a catalyst for change and being responsible for other people's choices. The trial began on a cold February morning in downtown Seattle. The courthouse was surrounded by protesters from both sides, supporters holding signs saying, "Believe survivors and justice for Emma," while Marcus's supporters carried signs reading, "Innocent until proven guilty," and "Support our police." Emma had to enter through a back entrance with armed escorts. The death threats had increased as the trial date approached, and the judge had implemented extraordinary security measures. The jury selection took 3 days. Both sides fought over every potential juror, searching for bias, either toward law enforcement or toward abuse survivors. The final jury consisted of 8 women and 4 men, ranging in age from 25 to 67. Assistant District Attorney Torres opened with a methodical presentation of the evidence. He showed Emma's photographs, played her recordings, and read excerpts from her journal. The courtroom was silent as the scope of Marcus's abuse became clear. The defendant used his position as a police officer to gain access to vulnerable children, Torres told the jury. He then systematically groomed and abused them, counting on his authority and reputation to protect him from consequences. David Jackson's opening statement tried to paint Emma as an unstable teenager with a grudge against authority figures. He suggested that her accusations were revenge for normal parental discipline and that she had manipulated other supposed victims to support her false claims. The first week of testimony focused on Emma's case. She spent 2 days on the witness stand, walking the jury through her relationship with Marcus from the beginning. She described how he'd initially been kind and supportive, gradually building trust before crossing boundaries. Her testimony about the abuse itself was clinical and detailed. She never broke down or showed emotion, which Jackson tried to use against her during cross-examination. "Miss Harrison, isn't it unusual that you can discuss these alleged events so calmly? Wouldn't a real victim show more distress?" Attorney Martinez objected immediately. "Your Honor, there's no standard way for abuse victims to behave. The defense is perpetuating harmful stereotypes." Judge Williams sustained the objection and instructed the jury to disregard Jackson's question. But I could see some jurors looking confused by Emma's composure. The second week brought testimony from the other victims. Each one told a similar story. Marcus had gained their trust, isolated them from potential help, then gradually escalated his abuse while threatening consequences if they spoke up. Ashley Porter testified via video link from the psychiatric hospital. She was pale and shaky, but her testimony was powerful. She described how Marcus had convinced her that the abuse was normal and that no one would believe her if she complained. He said police officers know how to make problems disappear. Ashley testified. He said if I ever told anyone, he could have me arrested or hurt my family. The third victim, Rachel Murphy, was now 26 and working as a social worker. Her testimony was the most emotional as she described how Marcus's abuse had affected her ability to trust men and maintain relationships. "I became a social worker to help other kids who went through what I did," she testified. "But I never had the courage to report my own abuser until Emma showed me it was possible." The defense's strategy became clear during the third week. They brought in character witnesses who testified about Marcus's exemplary record as a police officer. Officers, community members, and even some crime victims praised his dedication and integrity. They also brought in a psychologist who testified that false allegations of sexual abuse often occurred in families going through stress or transition. He suggested that Emma's accusations began shortly after her mother's marriage to Marcus, indicating possible adjustment issues. Attorney Martinez was ready for this line of attack. During her cross-examination of the psychologist, she established that he'd never interviewed Emma or reviewed her medical records. She also showed that his testimony about false allegations contradicted current research on child abuse disclosure patterns. The prosecution's rebuttal phase brought in experts on child sexual abuse, explained the typical patterns of grooming and disclosure. They testified that Emma's behavior and timeline were completely consistent with genuine abuse cases. Dr. Hoffman testified about Emma's therapy sessions, describing the symptoms and trauma responses she'd observed. Emma exhibits classic signs of childhood sexual trauma, she testified. Her delayed disclosure is typical for victims who are abused by trusted authority figures. The final week of testimony focused on the physical evidence. Forensic experts analysed Emma's photographs and recordings, confirming they hadn't been altered or fabricated. Computer specialists testified about metadata and timestamps that corroborated Emma's timeline. The prosecution's closing argument was devastating. Torres methodically connected all the evidence, showing how Marcus had used his position and authority to abuse multiple children over many years. The defendant didn't just steal these children's innocence, Torres told the jury. He stole their faith in the very institutions meant to protect them. He violated the sacred trust placed in law enforcement officers, and he counted on that same authority to silence his victims. Jackson's closing argument focused on reasonable doubt. He argued that the prosecution had failed to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt, and that the accusers were motivated by money and attention rather than truth. My client has served this community honourably for 20 years, Jackson argued. Are you really going to destroy his life and career based on the uncorroborated claims of troubled teenagers? The jury deliberated for 6 hours over 2 days. When they returned, the forewoman stood to read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. Marcus showed no emotion as the verdicts were read, but I saw his shoulders slump slightly. Emma squeezed my hand tightly, tears streaming down her face for the first time during the entire trial. The sentencing hearing was held 2 weeks later. Each victim was allowed to give an impact statement describing how Marcus's abuse had affected their lives. Emma's statement was the longest and most comprehensive. She talked about the nightmares, the trust issues, the academic problems, and the ongoing therapy. But she also talked about finding strength through speaking out. Marcus stole 3 years of my childhood, she concluded, but he didn't break me. And by bringing him to justice, we've protected countless other children from becoming his victims. Judge Williams sentenced Marcus to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Your abuse of your position as a police officer to prey upon children represents the worst betrayal of public trust this court has ever seen, the judge said. The aftermath brought both relief and new challenges. Emma was finally free from the fear that Marcus would hurt other children, but the media attention continued. She received invitations to speak at conferences and appear on television shows to discuss her experience. We declined most of these requests, focusing instead on Emma's healing and education. She'd missed significant amounts of school during the investigation and trial, and we wanted her to have as normal a senior year as possible. The Seattle Police Department underwent a complete review of their policies regarding officers' interactions with community members' children. Several training programs were implemented, and a special unit was created to investigate allegations of abuse by law enforcement personnel. Other police departments across the country began implementing similar reforms after Emma's case gained national attention. Congressional hearings were held on the issue of abuse of authority by law enforcement, with Emma testifying via video link about needed policy changes. Emma graduated high school with honours despite everything she'd been through. She received a full scholarship to study criminal justice at the University of Washington, and with plans to become a victim advocate, specialising in cases involving abuse by authority figures. During her graduation speech as class valedictorian, Emma spoke about finding courage in impossible situations. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is speak an uncomfortable truth, even when everyone around you would rather believe a comfortable lie. The ripple effects of Emma's courage continued long after Marcus's conviction. A documentary about her case won several awards and inspired other young survivors to come forward. 3 other police officers in different states were arrested after victims saw Emma's story and found the courage to report their own abuse. Emma started a non-profit organisation called Voices of Truth that provides support and resources for young people who've been abused by authority figures. The organisation helps connect victims with attorneys, therapists, and other survivors who understand their experience. 2 years after the trial, Emma received a letter from Ashley Porter, who had completed her psychiatric treatment and was doing well. "Your courage saved my life," Ashley wrote. "I was ready to give up, but watching you stand up to Marcus showed me that healing was possible." Emma keeps that letter framed on her desk at college, along with dozens of others from survivors who found hope in her story. She's become a powerful advocate for systemic changes to protect children from abuse by trusted adults. Looking back, I realised that night at the promotion ceremony wasn't when Emma destroyed our family. It was when she saved it. She freed us both from living a lie and showed me what real courage looks like. My daughter didn't just survive her trauma, she transformed it into a force for protecting other children. The legal bills eventually totaled over $200,000, but victim advocacy organisations helped cover most of the costs. Emma's case established important precedents for prosecuting authority figures who abuse their positions to harm children. Marcus filed several appeals from prison, all of which were denied. He'll spend the rest of his life behind bars, where other inmates don't look kindly on those who hurt children. Emma takes no pleasure in his suffering, but she sleeps better knowing he can't hurt anyone else. The trauma didn't disappear with Marcus's conviction. Emma still has difficult days when the memories surface unexpectedly. She continues therapy and has learned healthy coping strategies, but healing is an ongoing process rather than a destination. What amazes me most is Emma's resilience and her commitment to helping others. She could have retreated into herself after everything she went through, but instead she chose to use her experience to make the world safer for other children. Emma recently told me that she's considering law school after finishing her undergraduate degree. She wants to specialise in prosecuting crimes against children and reforming systems that fail to protect victims. "Mom," she said during our last conversation, "I used to think what happened to me was just bad luck. Now I realise it was preparation for my life's work. I went through hell so I could help guide other people out of it." My daughter is 20 years old now, a sophomore in college studying criminal justice and psychology. She maintains a 4.0 GPA while running her non-profit organisation and speaking at conferences across the country. She's everything I hoped she would become and more than I ever imagined possible. The house where we lived with Marcus was eventually sold, and we used the proceeds to establish a scholarship fund for survivors of childhood sexual abuse who want to pursue careers in law enforcement, social work, or victim advocacy. Emma recently started dating a young man she met in college. It took her years to trust enough to have a romantic relationship, and I was worried about how she'd handle the intimacy. But she's worked hard in therapy to separate her trauma from healthy relationships. "Tyler knows about my past," she told me. "He's patient and understanding, and he supports my advocacy work. He says what I survived made me stronger, not damaged." Sometimes I wonder what our lives would have been like if Emma hadn't found the courage to act that night. Marcus would probably still be a respected police captain, continuing to abuse children while hiding behind his badge and reputation. The thought makes me physically ill. Instead, Emma's bravery exposed a predator and led to systemic changes that will protect countless children in the future. She turned her worst experience into her greatest strength, and I've never been more proud to be her mother. The anniversary of the promotion ceremony is approaching again. 3 years ago, it was the worst night of our lives. Now, Emma uses that date to host an annual fundraising gala for her non-profit organisation. Every year on this date, I choose to celebrate survival instead of mourning victimisation, she explains to donors and supporters. This date changed from representing my worst trauma to symbolising my greatest triumph. Emma's story continues to inspire others. She recently received a letter from a 14-year-old boy whose soccer coach was abusing him. The boy had seen Emma's documentary and found the courage to tell his parents, leading to the coach's arrest and conviction. "Your story saved me," the boy wrote. "I thought I had to suffer in silence forever. But you showed me that speaking up was the right thing to do, even when it's scary." These letters arrive regularly, each one a reminder that Emma's courage to act has protected far more children than we'll ever know. The ripple effects of that night at the promotion ceremony continue spreading outward, creating waves of justice and healing. As I write this, Emma is preparing for her junior year of college. She's been accepted into an accelerated law program that will allow her to earn her bachelor's and law degrees in 6 years instead of 7. She can't wait to start prosecuting cases like her own. "Mom, every predator I put behind bars is a victory for every child who was too scared to speak up," she told me recently. "I'm going to spend my career making sure that what happened to us doesn't happen to anyone else." My daughter taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite the fear when innocent people need protection. She showed me that sometimes the smallest person in the room can be the most powerful when they refuse to stay silent about injustice. Emma Harrison will graduate from law school in 3 years, and I have no doubt she'll become one of the most effective prosecutors in the country. She's already changed the world by refusing to accept abuse as inevitable, and she's just getting started. The night Emma exposed Marcus at his promotion ceremony, I thought our world was ending. I had no idea we were actually watching it begin. 5 years have passed since that terrible night, and Emma is now a third-year law student at Georgetown University, where she transferred after her sophomore year to study under Professor Diana Whitfield, the country's leading expert on prosecuting crimes against children. Emma commutes between Washington, D.C. and Seattle monthly to continue running her non-profit organization, which has now helped over 500 young survivors find their voices and seek justice. The organization has grown beyond anything we could have imagined. Emma hired 3 full-time staff members last year, including Jennifer Walsh, a former FBI investigator who specializes in cases involving abuse of authority. They've opened satellite offices in Portland and Denver, with plans to expand to Chicago and Atlanta next year. Emma's boyfriend Tyler proposed to her last month in the most beautiful way. He organized a surprise gathering of all the survivors who'd written to Emma over the years, those who felt comfortable attending. When Emma walked into the room and saw dozens of young people whose lives had been changed by her courage, she started crying before Tyler even got down on one knee. "I want to spend my life supporting your mission to protect children," Tyler said as he proposed. "You've shown me what real heroism looks like, and I want to be your partner in changing the world." Their wedding is planned for next summer, after Emma graduates from law school. She's already been accepted to several prosecutors' offices for her post-graduation internship, including the King County Prosecutor's Office here in Seattle, where she'd worked specifically on crimes against children. Marcus died in prison 18 months ago. Another inmate attacked him in the shower, and he didn't survive his injuries. Emma felt conflicted when she heard the news, relieved that he could never hurt anyone again, but sad that his other victims never got the closure of seeing him serve his full sentence. "I wish he'd had to live with the consequences of his actions for longer," Emma told me when we discussed his death, "but I'm grateful that no one else will ever be hurt by him." The detective who investigated the attack told Detective Chen that several inmates had received letters from Marcus's victims over the years detailing the crimes he'd committed against children. Prison justice is swift and brutal for those who hurt kids. Emma's advocacy work has led to significant legislative changes. The Emma's Law package, passed in Washington state 2 years ago, requires mandatory reporting training for all adults who work with children, establishes specialized courts for cases involving abuse by authority figures, and creates a victims' compensation fund for survivors of such crimes. Similar legislation has been introduced in 12 other states, with Emma testifying before legislative committees about the need for systemic changes to protect vulnerable children. She's become one of the most recognizable faces in the movement to reform how we handle abuse cases involving trusted adults. The documentary about Emma's case, titled Breaking the Blue Wall, won an Emmy Award for Outstanding Investigative Documentary. Emma donated her appearance fee to fund therapy for other young survivors. Dr. Hoffman, who still serves as Emma's therapist, has written a book about trauma recovery in cases involving authority figure abuse. The Courage to Speak, a therapist's guide to supporting young survivors, has become required reading in many psychology and social work programs. Emma wrote the foreword, describing her own healing journey and the importance of finding the right therapeutic support. "Healing isn't a destination you reach," Emma wrote. "It's an ongoing process of choosing courage over fear, truth over silence, and hope over despair. Every day I make the choice to use my pain as a force for protecting others." Detective Chen was promoted to lieutenant 3 years ago and now heads the Special Victims Unit for the entire Seattle Police Department. She credits Emma's case with transforming how her department approaches abuse allegations involving law enforcement personnel. "Emma taught us that believing victims isn't enough," Detective Chen told a conference of law enforcement professionals last year. "We have to create systems that make it safe for them to come forward and support them throughout the entire process." The ripple effects of Emma's courage have reached international levels. She was invited to speak at the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child in Geneva last year, where she addressed delegates from 195 countries about the need for global standards in protecting children from abuse by trusted adults. "Predators count on our silence," Emma told the assembly. "They rely on our shame, our fear, and our belief that no one will listen to us. But when we speak truth to power, we break that cycle of abuse for countless future victims." Emma's UN speech was broadcast globally and translated into dozens of languages. She received thousands of messages from survivors around the world, many of whom had never spoken about their own experiences until they heard Emma's story. One letter particularly moved Emma. It came from a 15-year-old girl in Brazil whose school principal had been abusing her for 2 years. After seeing Emma's UN speech, the girl found the courage to tell her parents, leading to the principal's arrest and the discovery of 5 other victims at the school. "Your voice gave me permission to find mine," the girl wrote in Portuguese, with an English translation attached. "Now I want to help other children the way you helped me." Emma has that letter framed in her apartment in Washington, D.C., alongside the dozens of others that remind her why she continues this difficult work despite the personal cost. The personal cost has been significant. Emma still has nightmares about Marcus, though they're less frequent now. She struggles with trust issues and has had to work hard to maintain healthy relationships. The constant public attention and occasional harassment from those who still don't believe her story takes an emotional toll. "Some days, I wonder what my life would have been like if I'd stayed silent," Emma admitted to me during our last phone call. "I might have had a normal college experience, dated without having to explain my trauma, chosen a career based on passion rather than mission." But then she always comes back to the same conclusion. But how many children would have been hurt if I hadn't spoken up? How many victims would still be suffering in silence? I can live with difficult days if it means other kids don't have to live with what I experienced. Emma's undergraduate thesis, which she presented at Georgetown last spring, was titled "Institutional Betrayal and the Courage to Resist: How Young Survivors Can Break Cycles of Abuse." It examined case studies from around the world where children had successfully exposed adults in positions of authority, leading to systemic changes in their communities. The thesis is being adapted into Emma's first book, which will be published by a major academic press next year. The advance money is being donated entirely to her non-profit organisation to fund expansion into underserved rural communities where reporting abuse is even more difficult. Tyler has been incredibly supportive throughout Emma's healing journey and advocacy work. He accompanied her to Geneva for the UN speech and plans to attend law school himself, inspired by Emma's mission to reform the justice system. They've talked about starting a legal clinic together that would specialise in representing young survivors of authority figure abuse. "Emma showed me that some causes are worth dedicating your entire life to," Tyler told me at their engagement party. "I want to spend my career supporting the work she started." The engagement party was held at the Seattle courthouse where Emma had testified against Marcus 5 years earlier. It was her idea to have it there as a way of reclaiming that space and transforming it from a place of trauma into a place of celebration. Judge Patricia Williams, who had presided over Marcus's trial, attended the party and spoke about the profound impact Emma's case had on the judicial system. "Emma changed how we think about credibility, trauma responses, and the courage it takes for young people to stand up to powerful adults," Judge Williams said. Her case will be studied in law schools for generations. Attorney Rebecca Martinez, who represented Emma throughout the legal proceedings, has since started a non-profit law firm that exclusively represents survivors of institutional abuse. She's handled over 200 cases in the past 5 years, many of them referred by Emma's organisation. Emma's case established crucial precedents about believing young victims and holding authority figures accountable. Attorney Martinez explained at a legal conference. But more importantly, her courage inspired a generation of survivors to speak up, knowing they wouldn't be alone in seeking justice. The legal precedents from Emma's case have been cited in over 150 court cases across the United States, helping other young survivors achieve justice against teachers, coaches, religious leaders, and other authority figures who abused their positions. Emma keeps a map in her office marked with pins representing each case where her story provided legal or emotional support for other survivors. The map is covered with hundreds of pins spanning all 50 states and extending into Canada and Mexico. Each pin represents a child who found their voice, Emma explained to a visiting journalist. That's worth every difficult moment of the past 5 years. Ashley Porter, the victim who had attempted suicide during Marcus's trial, has become one of Emma's closest friends and collaborators. After completing her psychiatric treatment and earning a master's degree in social work, Ashley joined Emma's organisation as Director of Crisis Intervention. "Emma saved my life when I was at my lowest point," Ashley said during a joint interview they gave to a national magazine. "Now we work together to create the support systems we wish we'd had when we were first finding our voices." The two of them have developed a crisis intervention protocol now used by child advocacy centres across the country. The protocol recognises that coming forward about abuse can initially increase trauma and suicide risk for some survivors, and it provides immediate, intensive support during those critical first weeks after disclosure. Rachel Murphy, the third victim from Marcus's case, became a licensed therapist specialising in treating survivors of authority figure abuse. She runs a practice in Portland and regularly collaborates with Emma's organisation to provide therapy services for young survivors who can't afford traditional treatment. We've turned our trauma into a force for healing, Rachel explained in the same magazine interview. Marcus thought he was breaking us, but he actually created a network of advocates who are stronger together than we ever could have been apart. The three women meet annually on the anniversary of Marcus's conviction, not to dwell on their trauma, but to celebrate their survival and plan new initiatives to protect other children. Last year's meeting resulted in the development of a mobile crisis response unit that can be deployed anywhere in the country when a major abuse case involving authority figures comes to light. Detective Chen recently shared statistics showing the impact of Emma's case on reporting rates in Seattle. Reports of abuse by authority figures have increased by 400% in the past 5 years, not because abuse has increased, but because victims now believe they'll be taken seriously. Emma didn't just seek justice for herself, Detective Chen noted. She created an environment where other victims felt safe to come forward. That's the true measure of her courage. Not just what she endured, but what she prevented for countless others. The Seattle Police Department now has the most comprehensive training program in the country for investigating abuse allegations involving law enforcement personnel. Officers learn about trauma responses, grooming patterns, and the unique challenges faced by victims who must report crimes against authority figures. Emma was invited to address the graduating class at the police academy last year, speaking to new officers about their responsibility to protect rather than exploit the trust placed in them by the community. Every badge comes with the power to profoundly impact lives, Emma told the recruits. The choice is yours whether that impact will be protective or predatory. Choose protection, always. Her speech received a standing ovation from the recruits, many of whom approached her afterward to express their commitment to upholding the highest standards of conduct. Several mentioned that her story would stay with them throughout their careers as a reminder of why their integrity matters. Emma's nonprofit organization has partnered with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children to create a nationwide database of cases involving abuse by authority figures. The database helps identify patterns and connect investigations across jurisdictions, making it harder for predators to simply move to new positions when allegations surface. The database has already led to the identification of several serial offenders who had been moving between schools, youth organizations, and law enforcement agencies for years. Emma's insistence on systemic solutions rather than just individual justice has made her organization uniquely effective at preventing abuse rather than just responding to it. Looking toward the future, Emma plans to run for prosecutor in King County after completing several years of courtroom experience. Her platform focuses on reforming how the justice system handles cases involving vulnerable victims and powerful perpetrators. I want to be the prosecutor I needed when I was 16, Emma explained in a recent interview. Someone who understands trauma, believes survivors, and isn't intimidated by defendants with badges or titles. Political analysts predict that Emma would easily win such a race, given her national recognition and the profound respect she's earned from both law enforcement and victim advocacy communities. But Emma insists she won't consider running until she's gained enough courtroom experience to be truly effective in the role. As I finish writing this update, I'm overwhelmed with pride at the woman Emma has become. She took the worst experience of her life and transformed it into a force for protecting countless other children. She chose courage over comfort, truth over silence, and service over self-protection. The 16-year-old girl who stood up at that promotion ceremony 5 years ago has become a national leader in child protection advocacy. She's testified before Congress, addressed the United Nations, and fundamentally changed how we approach cases involving abuse by authority figures. But what makes me proudest isn't her public achievements. It's the private moments when I see her laugh genuinely with Tyler, or watch her patiently counsel a scared teenager who's just found the courage to speak up, or observe her choosing hope and healing despite everything she's endured. Emma Harrison didn't just survive her trauma. She used it to build a better world for every child who comes after her. And that, I believe, is the truest measure of heroism, not just overcoming adversity, but using that experience to ensure others don't have to face the same battles alone. If you made it to the end of this incredibly long story, thank you for witnessing Emma's journey from victim to survivor to advocate. Her courage to speak that night saved not just herself and Lily, but hundreds of children who might otherwise have suffered in silence. Sometimes one voice, raised at the right moment, can echo through generations of change.